All right, we're continuing our study in the fruit of the Spirit. We've done all of love, joy. Now we're on peace. Peace. And we're looking, what we're doing is we're doing other words that kind of fall under those and help us understand peace better and how we can see the fruit of peace in our lives and practice it. And today's word, first word, is fairness. Fairness. Now, you might not think that's peace, but I think it goes under peace because it helps us get along with people. It helps us understand people and to be understanding both ways. They understand us, we understand them. That's fair, right? Anyway, the opposite word we're going to use is just unfairness. Unfairness. And here's our description or definition we're going to use for fairness is looking at a decision from the viewpoint of each person involved. Looking at a decision from the viewpoint of each person involved. And this verse is a good proverb to learn and remember when we're dealing with hearing stories about people, hearing things and having to make decisions for those who have children or grandchildren, and you hear their complaints or their excuses. Here's what I want you to hear this verse. It's Proverbs 17:18. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. And have you ever run into this where you hear a story and you're like, oh, how could they do that? Oh, that's so wrong. And then someone comes and tells you the other person's view of it, and you go, oh, not so cut and dried. They really have a point. And we tend to rush to judgment. We call it nowadays. We make a judgment based on the first thing we hear. But let us remember fairness and make sure we hear all the viewpoints. One of the things I try to tell myself, and I sometimes say, when someone tells me, especially like someone is sharing about their marriage or about a situation, and I go, wow, yeah, I can see what they're talking about. Of course, we're only hearing one side. That doesn't mean that side is wrong. I'm just saying we're just hearing one side, and a viewpoint can change very much. I'll tell you a story. When I was living in Westminster, my mom and I went to visit my sister-in-law one afternoon, and she had a pile of laundry she was folding. As we were visiting, this was my brother Tim's wife, Kathy, and we were sitting visiting and mom and I said, well, we'll help fold the clothes. There was towels, it was all sorts of stuff, but the towels I remember because we looked at her and we said, how would you like your towels folded? Now, am I wrong that everybody folds their towels differently? We fold them differently by what cupboard we're going to put them in. Our same people, same family, if it's going in this one, it's folded this way. If it's folded going in this one, it's folded another way. Okay, that's what we understand. Well, my sister-in-law, pretty insecure, mom is her mother-in-law. After we asked that, she told us what she wanted, and we began folding them that way. And mom had to go to the bathroom or leave or go somewhere. And Kathy said to me, I imagine now I fold my towels wrong. And I went, she said, does your mom think I did that's a wrong way to fold towels? No, mom wasn't even thinking that at all. And it's because of a viewpoint. Now, if you heard a viewpoint said, my mother-in-law thinks I fold my towels wrong, you would only hear one side, and the other side would be going, huh? I don't even care how she folds her towels. It's true. And we need to be careful we don't assume what people are thinking or assume what happened when we only hear or understand one viewpoint. So let's see. Let's look at a couple things here that we can learn about fairness. I want you to know something, that fairness is part of God's character. Fairness is part of God's character. It's in Psalm 119, 75 and 76. I know, O Lord, that your regulations are fair. You disciplined me because I needed it. Now let your unfailing love comfort me, just as you promised me, your servant. God's character is fair, and that doesn't mean equal. Everybody's treated what we think is equal. That's something I think we struggle with among people too. You know, we say some as siblings, you always thought they weren't being fair because you measured it by equal or identical. But everybody has a little bit different needs, and parents sometimes have to treat one a little differently, not fairness, but a little differently for them to understand what they're talking about and to learn and to grow. And so, but God's character includes fairness, what is right, and listening, understanding, including other people's viewpoints as we deal with situations. After all, he inspired that proverb that says, hey, basically, listen to both sides before you make a decision. Number two, life is not fair. There it is. We all said it. We've all said it many times. Your children have said it. We've heard it. Life is not fair. Absolutely, life is not fair. Don't argue that. You'll always lose because life is not fair. But God is always good. That's got to be our answer. If someone says life is not fair, our answer is, I know, isn't it awful? But God is always good. In the midst of unfairness, in the midst of life not being fair, our God is always good. Ecclesiastes 9:11. This is just a reminder of the unfairness of life. I know you wanted that. I have observed something else under the sun. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race, and the strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle. The wise sometimes goes hungry, and the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. And those who are educated don't always lead successful lives. It is all decided by chance, by being in the right place at the right time. The writer of Ecclesiastes, if you think this world got unfair over time, the writer of Ecclesiastes tells us right here, life isn't fair. You think this one should win, they lose. This one's the wisest, but they're the poorest. What's going on? They're the most skilled, but they don't have the best job. I have seen people, I went to a toy store once to look for something, a gift for one of my nieces or nephews, and the toy clerk was down on the kneeling down straightening up toys, and I said, excuse me, can you tell me where this toy is? And she just said it without looking up at me. And I didn't understand her. I said, I'm sorry. And it was a visible sigh. It was like, and she looked at me and said where the toy was. Her appearance, her eyes and her face were so stunning, stunningly beautiful. This toy store clerk that I still didn't hear her. And that's probably why she sighed. That's why I didn't look at you. Every time I look at people, they don't hear me. The poor thing. She was more beautiful than any actress, any Miss America I'd ever seen. She was strikingly just beautiful. And she was stacking toys at Toys R Us. That's not how it's decided. Everything isn't fair. The prettiest ones aren't always declared the prettiest ones, the most beautiful, the most successful. Even the strongest warrior doesn't always win. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race. It's true. Things happen and they don't win for whatever reason. You know, whose name slips my mind right now is the Chariots of Fire runner. Do you know his name? Eric Little. Eric Liddell or Little. He was a Christian and he went to the Olympics and he was by far the fastest short 100-yard or whatever they did, the short 100-meter race. He was by far, he would have won in the Olympics, but they scheduled the race on Sunday. And he refused to compete on Sunday. It was a pattern of his life. It wasn't just that day. He refused to compete. So he was the fastest runner, but he didn't win because he didn't compete. But he did compete another day, and he ran the 300 or something a little more. He wasn't expected to win, but he did. He did win something. But it's interesting because he stood for what he felt was right. But he didn't win, even though he was the fastest runner. So life is not fair, but we must remember that God is always good. No matter what it looks like, no matter what else we know, we must know this, and we must pass this on and teach it to our children in the world. Yes, life is not fair, because that's how they try to judge God. If God is so loving, why does this? Life is not fair, but God is always good. It is not just who he is, it's his very character. And then third point here, and I guess I should have given you a verse thing because I see I have quite a few verses here. God expects us to be fair. God expects us to be fair. One of the most obvious verses is the first one I list there, one you have on your paper, Luke 6:31, do to others as you would like them to do to you. That is what's that called? Does anyone know? The golden rule. It does not say do to others what they do to you or as they do to you. That's how we like to quote it. Well, they did it to me, so I did it back. That's the golden rule. No, that's not. The golden rule is to treat people the way you want them to treat you. In other words, there's a fairness issue here. And then look at Leviticus 19:15. I'm sorry I didn't give that, but you'll listen really good. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. We need to not let something about their character give them preference with us. Something about like they're poor, so they should get to have more rights or less rights. Yes, Betty. It's listed on your paper, Leviticus 19:15. The references are there. Aren't they? Okay. Colossians 4:1. Masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. That's a good reminder. And you say, well, I don't have a servant. I don't have slaves. But sometimes you have someone you're in charge of, or you're over like a boss. And all we have to remember is that we have a boss too. And the Lord is our master, and we need to treat people as he would treat them. And James 1 through 5. My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the God of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the man, poor man, you stand over there, or sit down at my feet, have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? God doesn't want us to prejudge people by what they look like. I heard about a pastor who didn't come into the front at first. He went out and he dressed like a shabby old man. And he dressed in such a way that they couldn't tell it was him. And he came into the church to see what would happen. I never heard what happened. But that would be an interesting experiment to see how when they don't know the person, and he doesn't look like someone you want to give attention to. How they treat them. I know, so I want to encourage you. This Sunday is group sign up starts. And what I want to encourage you isn't about groups. I'm telling you that because I have to work the groups table. And one of my ministries I do when I don't work tables is I go around and I say, greet people that I don't know or that I do know, but very little. I've only greeted them a couple times. And I go and I try to find new people. They say that, yeah, my mom, one time I said something about doing that. And she says, yeah, that's a gifting. And I go, no, I don't think it's a gifting. It's very hard for me. But I push myself out of my comfort zone because it's important that they feel welcome. And so you might have to fill in for me this week. If you're here Sunday and I'm at the table, I barely get in time to play the piano. Or you could play the piano. But just if you walk in, instead of just going and sitting in your seat 5 minutes early, look around and see, is there somebody here that I could welcome? Now, I'll give you a little secret so you don't feel stupid when you say, are you new today? And they go, no, I came here when you were here. I saw you come here first week, so you don't feel bad. The question is not, is this your first Sunday, to ask. The best way to say it is, how long have you been coming to MCA? And if they've been coming 30 years, you go, wow, that's awesome. How come you never greeted me? No, just that. But if it's their first time, they won't go, don't you know it's my first time? They'll just, this is actually my first time. And one of the things I do is I try to find out if they have a welcome packet. And the way I find that out is I say, did you get a welcome packet? A welcome gift. That's what we were working on at one table today. And then I go get one for them. I used to try this. I used to say, on your way out, be sure you stop by the kiosk. But then I went, I'm not sure they did. I want to be sure they get the welcome gift. So I went and got one myself and bring it to them. So I'm just telling you some things we can all do. This isn't my job to do. This is my being part of this church to do. And so you can do it too. Maybe even come a little early and say, hey, I could do that. That's something I can do. I can greet weird, strange people that I don't know. It's interesting because we call someone we don't know a stranger, like they're stranger than us. It's a funny word because it makes a judgment. Well, it must be strange or stranger. Tony. The welcome gifts are kept in the kiosks on the side, underneath on the bottom. Or you can ask whoever the service team leaders are that week, whoever's passing out, who's ever passing out. I don't remember is Maria this week? She might be this week. There's a different couple each week or people each week. I know Angie was standing there last week, so I think that was her. Anyway, yeah, you can ask them. They know where they are, but find it if it's in the lower kiosk area there. And 1 Peter 2:21-23. Don't just think of this as fairness. Look at how Jesus dealt with unfairness toward him. You see, when we're going to live this fairness, we would like to sometimes impose fairness on other people. I am being fair, but they're not, right? I'm fair, they're not fair, and that's not fair. But God is always good. And so, but this is about how Jesus was treated and what he did. So here we go. Here's what we do. 1 Peter 2:21-23. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, Neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly. Our response to being treated unfairly is to entrust ourselves to the Lord. Lord, you see this. You see I'm not being treated fairly. I turn it over to you. I don't retaliate. I don't get angry or threaten, but I just trust you. You deal with them. And that's what God says to do too. When he says, vengeance is mine. Let me handle it because you're not good at it. And he's right. We're not. We go too far.
We go too far and then think we didn't go far enough.
We would go too far. We wouldn't know where to stop. And God knows. And so he says, you better leave that to me. I'll do it. I'll handle it my way, but I'll handle it rightly, justly. You know, in the middle of this little passage, it says, you might follow in his steps. You hear those words there? In his steps is the words where it was a book years ago. It was called In His Steps. Wonderful book. I'm sure they have it at the library, about a church that decided to make every decision as asking themselves, what would Jesus do? Now, the new books are called What Would Jesus Do? But the original book was called In His Steps. But that was the same thing. They asked the Lord, ask themselves, what would Jesus do? And that's how we deal with unfairness too. Or fairness, not having fairness on again. Not being treated fairly. I couldn't get the words out. And I'm a professional speaker. All right, let's go look at these last two quotes. This is a great one for parents. Live so that when your children think of fairness and integrity, they think of you. Is that a great point? So that when your children, you live, not just talk, live so that when your children think of the words fairness or integrity, they think of you. And that's the author of the book, Life's Little Instruction Book. And this is someone named Brannon or Brannon. How others handle justice may not be up to me, but when I react to others, I must show integrity. We can only take care of what we do, and we have to just do that and follow in Jesus' steps.